630 CHED presents The Announcers. Opinion, personality, passion. The Announcers on 630 CHED, Edmonton's breaking news and conversation station.
This is The Announcers, and the team's back together.
We're back together.
It's been a while.
Hey.
Jalen Nye and Andrew Gross finally agreed to work together again.
The restraining order has expired.
Of course, both of you host the afternoon news right here on 630 CHED. On my show on Thursday, welcomed to the program a teacher at Archbishop Jordan Catholic High School out in Sherwood Park. Mike Joly's his name. And he got a standing ovation at the Greater Edmonton Teachers Convention a few days prior to his appearance on this show, when he essentially said, no more coddling, no more wrapping our kids in pillows and telling them that they're doing fantastic and passing them no matter what. No more no-zero policies. He says kids need to see a zero, and I'll tell you, looks like it resonated with you too.
Here. Yeah, man. I was listening to him and I'm thinking right on. And you know what? I think there's a lot of teachers out there that actually think that and believe that, but maybe aren't willing to get up in a public forum and lay it down. I know my husband read the article, and my husband's a teacher, and he's like, yeah, I texted him and said, you need to be listening to this. He says, I read the article in the newspaper, and I agree with most of his stuff, and I think a lot of people do, and I think a lot of citizens and a lot of, I don't want to say parents, but I think a lot of people who are looking at kind of the generations right now are saying, this is exactly what we need.
Well, first of all, your husband should be listening to Ched all the time, and not
You
just
shouldn't
when
have
you
to
tell
text
him
him.
to. That's
Well,
right.
he
should
does have
always
to
That was a failure.
But he has to teach too.
Yeah, no,
I will
fair
tell
enough.
you
Yeah.
that it sounds like 630 CHED was coming through the speakers all across Archbishop Jordan High School, because we were getting text messages from colleagues of Mike
Really?
as well as students of his, and then former students. I'll tell you what, before we get to your take on this, Andrew, because I'm curious, here is just a portion of Mike Joly's appearance on 630 CHED. This is why, according to him, failure is important.
I think failure, to me, has always been a growth, a learning sort of lesson that helps us grow. I'm 45. I'm relatively educated. I have lived in the world, as Jane Austen would say, and yet I fail every day. I still can't put that toilet seat down. My wife still goes crazy because of those things. So if kids grow up thinking that success is actually the most important thing, then when they fail, and I have watched friends go through this, the longer you go without failing, the more painful a failure is when it comes. So if kids learn to fail, learn that it's okay. One of the first lectures I give to my kids is embrace failure. It's okay. There's no shame in not succeeding. That's part of the most beautiful thing about being human. We fail every day and we keep going on.
So, Andrew, that's why failure is important, according to Mike Joly.
Well, I agree that failure is important, and it's a popular view and has been since that whole issue with the teacher being let
Lyndon
go.
Dorval.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
man.
And it's a popular opinion. It's easy to say, and not to take away from your guest. I do definitely agree with the guest, but I'd like to take it a step further. I think that students have to understand, and won't until teachers completely accept, that failure is not a negative thing. Failure is an actual really positive thing. And that's not just in school, but it's also in sports. It's in everything. We always think of a failure as just that, a failure. And not to use buzzwords like learning experience and that kind of thing, which I know your guest did, and for good reason. He's got a great background. Failure is a great thing. The only real true tragedy in failure is to not try or to not learn from it.
Exactly.
Those are the only two tragedies. And I have no problem with my child failing, and I have no problem with my child continuing to fail, because my job as a parent is to give my child every opportunity to succeed. The teacher's responsibility is to teach them and give them the tools to succeed. So it's a partnership. But the third part of that partnership is the child. So they need to learn how to learn. And I'll bet you, and I didn't listen to the whole show. I was busy and doing other things. I apologize, Ryan. I normally do. But I will bet you that people probably shared feelings about, well, I was never good at math, or I was never good at, they picked a subject that they failed at constantly. And the argument probably turned to whether or not we should help lower the bar, push them through, that sort of thing. You should fail them, because that's when they understand now that their future does not lie in anything mathematically based.
But the thing too, though, like I was really bad at math.
Yeah.
Grade 10, they gave me a 51 and said, don't come back, sort of thing. But failing at that point, I was trying my darndest to wrap my head around it. I really tried and tried hard, but I just couldn't get it. I mean, I think there's a difference between, kids who really try and are struggling, and then the ones that just don't show up, the ones that aren't showing up to class, who aren't doing this, or
That's exactly right.
And there is a difference.
That's
there.
what I'm talking about, because the teacher wants you to pass. They're there to teach. So in a way, they failed if they failed to teach you. The parent wants you to pass because nobody wants to have a kid who's failing in school. But the kid has to want to pass, and that's the last part of it. You have to get the child, to say, I need to figure out why I'm failing at this, and I need to at least bring my mark up. It doesn't have to be 100%, 90%, 80%. What do I have to do to get to 51%? And that's the third part of it. And it just feels like, to take a hard stand and say 0 is 0, I take a hard stand on 0 is 0 if you didn't try. If you just didn't make the effort and you gave up, then yeah, you get a 0. But if you tried and tried and tried, we got to figure out a way to get that kid to 51%. That's the only caveat I'll put on it. You have to figure out a way to get that kid to at least a 51.
I believe failure, like Mike Joly said, is really important in life. And I think the three of us sitting in this room have failed.
Sure.
In different ways over and over
Not
again.
just because we're sitting in this room,
not
right?
Yeah. But, whether, classroom, like I never failed a class, but when you talk about life failures,
Sure.
like different things, those lessons, and I've always called it failing forward. You learn from your mistakes. You learn from whatever it is, whether it's a failure with a work position, with a marriage, with whatever, a relationship of some sort. Fail forward. Take those lessons
Sure.
that you learned from that and apply it to the next go
But
around.
also find a way to adapt, because my point with the math was some people are just not good at math.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter how hard they try, the best they'll ever do is 50% or somewhere around there. Didn't mean to bring up a math example in the math argument. But I take, for example,
You're such an elitist.
I know. Grade 10. I could not wait to get to grade 10 to try out for the football team. It was all I was focused on. Grades were never a problem for me. I had an ex-general type dad who failure was not an option. So if I failed at something, I stayed home and went over it until I succeeded at it. So, and it worked. So, I'm cool with that. But I wanted to make that football team, and I didn't. I didn't. I didn't make the first round of cuts. And when they put that,
okay?
I'm great, because they put that piece of paper up and my name wasn't on it, and I couldn't believe it. And my dad didn't pick up the phone and phone the school and say they had to take another look at me. I didn't go to the principal and complain. I didn't appeal my case to the coach. But
Don't need the participation medal.
No, I didn't make it. I wasn't good enough. So, but my dad did give me this suggestion, and my dad's the smartest guy I ever met in my life, and I try and be a parent like him, at least the positive aspects of it. He said, go volunteer with the team somehow. Like, just get there, become part of that environment, and it'll work for you. And so I became the equipment manager. I'm that little kid that couldn't make the team, and instead I fixed the equipment and I made sure everyone's jerseys were out, and I did that for a whole season. And the next year I made the team. And I didn't care that that's how I made the team. I didn't care. I made the team. So if you can't succeed, find a way to succeed. Learn how to learn.
Whoa, man, we just went on a bit of a rant.
No, but that's the whole point. Is like I found that this conversation with Mike Joly, and I mean, you know how it goes. Our shows are structured different ways, and we never want mine to become too pigeonholed. But you go, typically a formula you could follow is half-hour guest, half-hour response, half-hour guest, half-hour. Never want to be that predictable. But we knew with Mike Joly we were going to need more time. And quite frankly, we didn't do this, but we could have kept him all morning because on the text line to 630, on the call line, on the emails, in the inbox, I mean, people were all sharing their own personal experience. One listener texted in to say, back in 2012, I retired when I sold my small business for $1.75 million. he said, I failed a class when I was in grade 9, and he said that was the first best thing to ever happen to me. That listener pointing out that ultimately they achieved professional success because they started learning tough lessons early. For other people, it was getting picked last at T-ball or not making the team or their parent not allowing them to do this until they did that. I mean, I remember when I was in grade 10, I was so proud to have made the rugby team and to have made the track team at Henry Wisewood High School. I had a deal with my parents because I was a bit of a handful in grade 10. I was a bit of a handful
Yeah, I think you still
for
are.
the formative years. I might still be. But there was a deal that if my marks weren't to a certain point, that rugby and track was out. And guess what? I had to walk up to my coaches and I had to resign, if you want to call it that. I had to leave those teams because my marks weren't there. But a deal was a deal with my parents, and I was the one that had made that bed, and I had to sleep in it. And that was a tough lesson that I learned. Everybody's got their own story, but it also prompts a lot of other conversations, like when is too early, or is there such a thing as too early to hand out a first 0? I mean, should a kid get a 0 in grade 1? Should a kid be picked last or lose a soccer game when they're only 6 years old?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, particularly
we
sports.
used to get failed. Like what? Remember the day you're getting held back. You failed grade 1, grade 2, whatever, grade 3. You failed. You're doing it over.
It's so hypocritical that the argument that everybody should get into sports early because it's about playing the sport and participating, and so therefore we give them a little ribbon that says they participated. But the kids in grade 1, we're trying to teach them in sport that it's just fun to be part of a team and it's just fun to play a sport. So why would you be a hypocrite about it and not have a winner? Because you know what? Winning's fun. Winning's a lot of fun.
And you're going to learn
You're
sooner
gonna
or
lose
later
from-
there's winners
yeah.
and losers.
Well,
in
and one of the
life.
things that I thought is so funny is these minor sports associations, including some right here in Edmonton, that say, we're not keeping score. And I've always thought,
What?
you might not be keeping score, but I guarantee you the kids are keeping score.
Yeah, actually.
Kids know how many goals they've scored.
Exactly, and related but not on point. It's hard to get people out to watch those games. And parents, if you've ever gone and seen a grade 1 soccer game, it's, oh my God. So to take away the one aspect of the game that's entertaining for most dads, for sure, the scoring. I mean,
But
what are you
happens
doing?
if a kid's team is getting beat like 19-1 every time? I mean,
Well, there could be a mercy rule.
Listen to this. Let me read a text message that I got from a regular listener, and I always appreciate hearing from, this is the name, Roger Rabbitleg. Okay? But Roger said, I became anxious and afraid to try because no one ever taught me how to fail as a child, and it took me 48 years to get past that. So maybe, there's probably some science behind teaching kids to fail early. Someone else that was listening into the show said, what do you think would sting more? Getting your first 0 or your first sense of failure in grade 1 or grade 7? Or even worse yet, maybe grade 12 or first year university.
Well, I guess the assumption is that small kids aren't resilient enough to take a failure, and I think as a result of that, they become not resilient enough to take a failure. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I lost in a game of lacrosse in the summer games 45-1 to Ontario. 45-1. And if you're not familiar with lacrosse, it's played basically and scored the same as hockey.
So there were 45 goals.
45 goals. And to this day, we still, when I see the guy who scored the one, we still high five.
But that's the thing, and we have those stories. I had a basketball team where I got one game, got the quarter of the points. Awesome.
Yeah.
Guess what? There were 8 points.
Yeah.
Right? And we were obliterated by, the best team. We scored 8 points in a basketball game.
One of the interesting things about Mike Joly, who joined us, who
Figure it out.
essentially prompted this entire conversation, the teacher from Archbishop Jordan, he works in so-called regular classrooms, let's call them that. I hope I don't get nailed up for saying that, but he also works with some students that have more of a challenge in school. He talked about teaching a child or teaching a student to accept their limitations, which I thought was a really interesting avenue to go around, because you don't hear teachers talk like that all the time. But Mike Joly also said...
You mean honestly?
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
But he also said he's not a fan of lowering the bar. He actually elaborated on that on the show. Here's Mike Joly on 630 Ched.
I am not a person that believes in lowering the bar. I believe in raising the bar, particularly for my students. My -2 students are often at risk for a variety of different reasons. And I believe that in order for them to build a life that they're proud of as adults, they need to build a very strong character along the way. And I just wanted to share sort of my philosophies about how character building is so important and that we should be considering that in our classrooms as I do.
So he doesn't want to lower the bar. And I think there's something to be said for that. You said essentially it's teaching somebody about reality.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, kids will not reach if you don't give them something to reach for. If you make it easy, then it's just easy. But I appreciate the fact that he's got some students who have some different needs. But then, of course, and I'm not a teacher, you teach those students differently. It should be as challenging for them, but possibly not. They don't perhaps need to meet the same criteria, but it should be as challenging as it is for those students without those needs.
There was actually a story I printed out for us to discuss sometime this week, and it was about okay, you know what, parents, you need to be realistic with your kids and maybe not pushing them to become the Prime Minister of Canada or the President of the United, whatever it is, making sure that it is about realities. It's about how far, accepting what you can do, what you can't do, and being realistic about it.
So in other words, you don't tell your children they can be anything they want to be.
That's right.
Yeah. That's a tough one. I struggle with that because I agree with you, but I spent years telling all my kids they could be whatever they could be, but not believing it. I just didn't want to take that hope away from them. So, I won't be a hypocrite and say that I didn't ever do that myself.
I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah.
I respect that honesty. Like, if you who knows a kid better than that kid's parents?
Right. I just didn't want them to quit trying. And I mean, they've all found their way in life to one extent or another. They've all ended up probably where they should be, and they're all happy.
Are they all in like middle management? Is that
here's the other thing too. When you talk about that, our expectations for our children are sometimes quite different than the expectations the children have for themselves. True. So when you're saying you can be prime minister and you can be a business leader, they might not want to be those things. And my kids are really happy having chosen paths that I would never have chosen for them. So I don't regret telling them they could be anything. Well, I guess in a way I do kind of regret because I told them they could be anything they wanted to be, and they chose things I would have never chosen for them. So I guess that was good parenting.
my grade 12 English teacher, so my grade 12 and my grade 13 English teacher, she just said straight out and said to me, and she said to my parents, she said, Jenny, Jay, that's what they called me, will never get anywhere on her marks. Straight up.
She'll have to get by on her looks.
It wasn't even that. Just a person, because she likes to talk. She said, but she will never get by on her marks.
My grade 12.
Up, it was realistic. I wasn't allowed to take grade 10 computers when computers were first coming through.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to take computers because I didn't have the math background.
Well, I've seen you on your iPhone, and that was probably a good call.
But when you start looking at that, and I think, had you known where the world was going with computers, you think, okay, that was kind of a stupid thing. But they didn't allow me to do it. And okay, I sucked it up and went on.
Maybe it's also how we define success or how we define achievement. Like, somebody that, I can think of, my brother comes to mind, Jonas, and I don't know how you'd feel about me talking about him here, but Jonas, through his, high school career, let's say, didn't really have a lot of use for school, and his marks kind of reflected that. Not that he didn't try, but he wasn't cut out for the style of testing or that style of learning. But I don't know a more talented, creative person than my brother Jonas. If you need an engine broken apart and rebuilt, you need an issue with a vehicle diagnosed, whether it's a sports car or a massive off-road vehicle, he'll solve it. He's a journeyman cabinet maker. His woodworking is incredible. He builds homes. This guy, he's a self-starter. His definition of success would be probably across the board. Now it works, right? How do you define success as an adult? Well, achievement in your field, a healthy income, a happy home life, all these types of things. So he is successful. His road's been different. But if you looked at Jonas Jesperson in grade 11 and said, oh, you've got this 50% in this, so you're not going to achieve much of nothing, and just took the wind out of his sails, he probably wouldn't have pursued the hobbies at the time that allowed him to develop a career now. So there can't be one formula for everyone.
No, and that's just it. Everyone learns differently. And again, I'm not a teacher, but I know that I learn differently than the kids around me. I achieved good marks, but I learned differently, but I learned to adapt. So I didn't like, and I was going to say my grade 12 teacher said never, English teacher said, Andrew will never make a living in the spoken or written word. That's what she told me. But in English, I would go and say, rather than an essay, can I do a film? And this would be long before you could easily do films. It would be on one of those cameras where you had to mail away the film and bring it back, and to edit, you had to cut it and
Tape it
together.
Cut and splice, as they say.
But I talked her into allowing me to do it that way, and that's just my brain worked that way. I was more artistic than I was. I didn't like sitting down and writing about what you told me to write about. I'd rather show you and just demonstrate for you what my thoughts are.
One of the interesting developments on Thursday's show when Mike Joly talked to us, there seemed to be kind of a common consensus. You don't see that, as if I have to tell you to, on talk radio, where it seems like almost the entire audience agrees.
Yeah.
However, also a consistent theme where listeners who identified as teachers or retired teachers would say, oh yeah, we all agree, and you can understand why we agree, but guess what? His take defies what you'll hear from school boards and the Ministry of Education as well. A lot of people implying that teachers may have ideas on how to more effectively reach their students, but they're handcuffed by policy and curriculum and directives.
And parents.
Yeah.
Parents. I mean, parents have to take responsibility as well. All these
Sure.
things that we've been talking about. I mean, if your kid's not going to class, you need to figure it out. You need to be responsible
That's
for
right.
that as well. All of those things. I mean, we get it all the time about the whole bubble wrap society and the kids and the sugar coat and all that. You know what? Get to school, do your business, all of
Yeah.
that, and parents, and lay it down. And we have a lot of people saying, stop being best buddies with your kids and parent.
It is funny because there's probably a slight hypocrisy there. Everybody agrees you should give a child a 0 if they fail. But if
Unless
you're
it's your kid.
Yeah, if it's your kid, then you're picking up the phone. He needs a second a chance.
I don't know, though. I was, I felt like it was therapy for me on Thursday because I shared on the air for the first time something that I don't talk much about, and that is the fact that I failed grade 10 math, returned as a grade 11 student, and then I failed a course my 4th year of university that prevented me from achieving the minor on my degree that I had been working toward.
Really, yeah.
And it was, and like I said, I felt like I was laying on the psychiatrist or psychologist's couch sharing this on over the air because I haven't really, I guess, talked about it much. Because I've always kind of regretted that I don't have that sociology minor, but also, with due respect to sociologists, who cares? But I learned that lesson that quite frankly, the university prof that I thought I had a good enough relationship with to recognize that it was my senior year and I had other big things on my plate. I was editor of the newspaper and I didn't have time for the class that he was teaching, so I didn't attend and didn't fulfill many of the requirements. And I remember the meeting sitting down with him where he looked at me in the eye and said, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, you have forced my hand. This was your decision. What does it say about the whole process? What does it say to the other students in the class if you get out of here, even with a C or a C minus? Like, if I pass you? And I had to, at that moment, go, you know what? Yeah. And as a grown adult, I was 22 at the time. I was a grown man. That was something I had to own. That was something I had to take responsibility for. But I guess it takes some people longer than others.
Did you learn from it?
I mean, I don't know what I learned from it, but I guess at the time I came to understand that I don't have that minor on my degree because of that complacency, because of that sense of entitlement. I don't know if it's applied to other things in life or if I really took it moving forward. Like I said, I hadn't talked about it too much until Thursday morning. But I wanted to be honest about it. But that was one for me where I thought that I should breeze on by, and an educator, in this sense, a university professor, said,
No.
I have a bit of a problem with that.
I was placed on academic probation in my first year of university. My marks were so low, I wasn't attending classes, I was partying a lot, and I phoned my dad, who had always been able to sort these things out for me in the past. And I phoned him and said, what should I do? And he said, you should learn to love digging ditches.
Yeah.
And I went back and got off probation.
If you are curious to hear the entire hour that Mike Joly spent with us, you can find that link, the SoundCloud file, at 630ched.com under the shows link. We also podcast it on iTunes. Just search for Ryan Jesperson. You can hear Jalen and Andrew on the air every weekday from 2 to 6, unless you're bumped for the Oilers.
That's right.
And I'm on the air from 9 to noon. Thanks for being a part of this edition of The Announcers.